Hi, hey everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Krishna. Um, yeah, I'm Rob from the Agency Fund. As Krishna mentioned, we are evidence-based funder doer. I guess that's one way of describing us. We also are very deeply interested in the idea around human agency being a very impactful way to improve people's lives. So those are kind of the two areas. Um, maybe some high-level relevance as to why you know, we do data things at the agency fund. As I mentioned earlier, we're an evidence-based funder, and we have, I guess there are many ways to think about how evidence works. We have a very specific way about thinking about it and kind of building these data capabilities, most importantly for your own purposes, but maybe down the line to be able to communicate your impact in a very rigorous, evidence-driven way that will help then downstream like get funding for you. So I just want to make sure that this idea around why evidence, important in itself, but also we live in this world where very good evidence can lead to funding. And if funding ever feels like a challenging challenge for your organization to grow, um, this is one path that exists. And it's really about, again, like the data and the evidence and maybe, storytelling and all that is still very important, but it really needs to come with a bit of that. So just a bit of background from that. Personally, like on an individual level, I've worked in the tech sector for about a decade prior to my last decade or so working in the social sector as kind of like a software engineer slash data scientist slash development economist. So those are kind of the hats that I wear. Yeah, super excited to chat with you all today. I'm looking forward to an ideally interactive, so feel free to interrupt me as much as you need and want. Um, yeah. Uh, by the way, are we doing introductions at all, KP, or is it just or are we just gonna dive in?
Maybe we can just dive in the interest of
Okay,
time.
cool, cool. Sounds good. All right. So let me bring up some slides. Let's just do this. So maybe for a quick show of hands, if I can see hands, let's see if I can see everybody here. How many people have heard of like user funnels or kind of this concept around user engagement? Is it I don't know, just like it's a familiar topic to you. Feel free to do some type of hand thing or emoji thing. Okay, cool. So relative and new, great. Um, that's good then. So can you all see my screen? Yeah, cool. So today we're going to be going over user engagement and impact measurement. So just kind of to quickly define these two things, user engagement is you offer a program, and of that program, how engaged are your users with your program? Because if people are engaged in your program, you can't really hope to have, in a sense, like impact. And that's the second part of this question is how are we going to measure impact? And this is in reference to what I was mentioning earlier around this like evidence-based yeah, just kind of evidence around impact. So that's kind of the two components that we'll be covering today. Um, so let's start with user funnels. So let's see. So you all have, I assume, like the beginnings of or some type of chat program that you would like your users to come through. Is that right? Like most folks are working in the context of chat. And um, you know, oftentimes you'll think about like, oh, like, okay, like now that I have this chatbot, and this chatbot actually like kind of generates some data because as people move through my chatbot, there's data that's produced. Like, how do I make sense of all this data, or how do I structure these data in a way that will help me internally understand what's going on with my users and be able to maybe communicate externally, like how engaged or how deep or how much of the program that you're offering is being kind of absorbed or taken in by your users. So the user funnel is in a way a means or a framework of setting up your program in a way that makes these metrics very easy to measure. So hopefully that's not uh, too confusing yet. Again, if there are any questions, feel free to stop me. And yeah. So cool. So we're going to just go through a set of stages. So as I mentioned, you take your program, like conceptually have it in your head, like I am doing this program. I want my users to do this particular thing because I can't force them. I want them to do this particular thing. And if they do this particular,
8925.
the outcome will be improved. Sorry, Atman?
I think it was by mistake. Like
Okay.
you can continue.
Okay, cool. So maybe the first step in your chatbot, as maybe you all are familiar with now with kind of starting this journey and using Glyphic, is the entry point. So like how many users in total arrive at your chatbot or kind of are eligible to sign up for your chatbot. So people who are recruited to engage with your chatbot. So this is the initial entry point. So in a sense, you have like a number here, like the number of people recruited. Second is, it's good to have that number of people recruited, but they actually need to take a step in your chatbot and in a sense like register. And this stage conceptually is just about like the first stage of, getting engaged with your chatbot. So that might be like scanning some QR code or joining some um, basically joining the chatbot in some way, shape, or form, such that like you actually see people's phone numbers like in Glyphic, for example. And you might like do some registration, get some background information, get them set up in whatever way they need to get set up to fully kind of engage with your service. Next is engaged. So, registration is just kind of a formality, but engagement means like they actually interacted with some of your content. So oftentimes, you know, you have your chance to make your first best impression. And sometimes when you don't make a first best impression, people don't want to continue to engage uh, down the line. So engagement is this phase in your funnel that has to measure kind of whether or not a user did the first meaningful thing in in your program, the social program that you're offering them. Next is retention. So, taking the first step is usually not enough in terms of like having impact on your users. You want them to do a sequence of things that are more than just like the first step. And so retained or retention is what we're defining as like a whole meaningful engagement with your chatbot's content or service. And finally, you have your changes in outcomes. So after your thought is like after they've like gotten the whole program, like everything I had to offer, then we should expect some change in some near-term outcome. So if it's an education program, maybe they're able to complete some numeracy or literacy worksheet in an improved way. Or if it's or if it's some type of thing around health behaviors, you can follow up on whether or not they perform that health behavior, whether it be like washing your hands or something to do with child health, those types of questions. And finally, what we want to see are significant changes in development outcomes. So, maybe they do perform better on some test or some worksheet that you give them in the chatbot, but do their test scores actually improve? Do their graduation rates improve? So kind of longer term outcomes. So these are the sequence of steps that we think about, and they're all kind of dependent on each other in a sense that you can't get to like engagement without registration, and you can't really get to retention without engagement. And we shouldn't expect big changes in your proximal outcome unless they're retained, and so on and so forth. So they're all kind of like built on top of each other, layer upon layer. So, uh, so next step, so this is each of the states. So I maybe want to pause here for a minute and just make sure that these states make sense to everyone, like conceptually they make sense. And also, if you have any questions on whether or not this actually can be used to fit the program that you have in mind. Any kind of questions or concerns about any of this? Okay, cool. All right. That's just like someone's background noise, I'm guessing, right? Not anyone. Okay, good. Okay, cool. So next step is program activities. So, what we did in the previous slide is kind of define conceptually what each of these things are, but what you'll need to do is actually specify very clearly what it means to be recruited, right? So, for example, recruitment could be like have QR code to sign up shared at the end of a hospital training. So let's say you run a program in a hospital, and after the hospital, you want them to sign up for your WhatsApp chatbot. So, um, so, so enable, in a sense, someone to get recruited, maybe you need to ensure that the QR code to get recruited is shared in the hospital, for example, like at the very beginning. So this is the very entry point into your funnel. Next is in the at the registration stage, at your chatbot basically needs to share a registration flow asking for kind of user details and consent and whatever else is part of your registration process. So these are just examples. In the engagement step, you as the program provider needs to send infant care information and knowledge and maybe a knowledge check thereafter. So maybe that's your first engagement point. Second, retention. What you need to do is send remaining information modules around and corresponding knowledge checks around health behavior in this sample health program, for example. And maybe your proximal outcomes is being able to collect information from them around how they're caring for their infant. And then maybe the longer term outcomes are the infant's or child's health, like in a longer term. So this is just an example of, in these different stages of your funnel, what is the activity that you, the program, the person operating your social program, what do you need to do at each of these stages? So that's what we call program activities. Secondly, on the other side of program activities, you need to define what the user needs to do. So, corresponding to having a QR code being shared to people to sign up, the user just needs to see and scan the QR code. And that's where data starts flowing into your systems, right? Because once they scan that QR code in Glyphic, you start to see like, oh, they showed up at the first node of my flow designer, for example. Secondly, on the registration piece, they basically need to complete the registration flow. And again, that is very clearly measured in your Glyphic chatbot, right? Like they completed the registration flow that you offered them. Third, then like a measure of engagement, they respond to the first content that you present them, and they read the content and they actually complete the knowledge check at the end of the content. So that's a first check that the material that you're offering them is engaging, and they decided to actually engage with it through your chatbot. Next, retention, that they actually complete maybe 80% of all of these, all of the content that you're offering them, for example. So that could be like kind of a measure for, oh, they've actually like kind of, we've been able to retain them in our system. Next, significant change in proximal outcomes. So in order to measure this proximal outcome, they need to complete a health behavior survey. Maybe that's within Glyphic, maybe that's outside of Glyphic, but in a sense, to measure this outcome that you want to see if it changed, you need to be able to measure it. So they need to complete that survey. And similarly, for these longer term child health outcomes, they need to complete that child health outcome survey in order for them to get through your entire funnel. if that makes sense. So any questions here? So far, we've just kind of defined each of the stages, and then we talked about like thinking about what you need to do to at each of these stages, then thinking about what they need to do to demonstrate success at each of these stages. And then if this all makes sense, and I'll pause for a minute to see if there are any questions, we can then talk about how just setting this up in this, relatively simple way can easily flow into metrics that are easy to communicate to donors and should be operationally useful for you in setting targets and priorities within your organization. So any questions so far about these states, about these activities? Should we do a knowledge check to make sure everyone's engaged? Okay, that's cool. So no questions, it seems like so far. So basically, at each of these stages, the next activity in terms of metrics is a simple counting game. Like, let's take the number of people who were initially recruited, for example. So let's say you know that 100,000 nurses, 100,000 new mothers at a hospital were given a training and shown this QR code. Then 80K of those 100K then registered themselves like on your platform. And you can actually measure that, right? You can measure each of these things. Next, 70K actually completed the first activity. Maybe 60K actually finished 80% of the activities. And maybe only 40K improved their infant care practices, and like 35K improved their child health outcomes, right? So this is kind of what we mean by a funnel. Like, I know it's a bit of a ramp right now, but you can, anyway, the idea is that you lose someone at each stage so that it kind of gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And with that, sorry, ignore the thing on the bottom. I don't know how it got there. With that, you have what are called conversion rates. So when you think about like, oh, we need KPIs, we need key performance indicators, like to help guide how well our program is working. What automatically comes out of each of these numbers are conversion rates, right? So, when you go from 100K, so these are all made up numbers, obviously, and they're probably too high when there's a reality to what you'll see. But I needed it to fit on the slide. So um, what happens, you just simply divide the current number by the number from the previous stage, and you have these conversion rates. So, 80% of people converted to registration, 88% of those registered converted to engagement, 85% of them converted to retention, and so on and so forth. Does that kind of make sense? And as part of this, like the first thing you can do with something like this is you can be like, okay, like where is my bottleneck the worst? And all these numbers are pretty close to each other, so it's not so obvious. But when you actually run your own funnel, you'll find like, oh my God, I'm losing like 80% of my users at this particular stage. And so you'll target the conversion rate that's lowest, and you'll be like, okay, like this is where I need to start thinking about what the problem is, right? Like this area right here. And yeah, so any questions here? So this is like where we get to the KPIs and the metrics, and it's meant to be like if you're ever like wondering what to measure or how to measure it, this is a very kind of classic way that they use this language in the tech sector basically, and it's a very easy way to be on the same page with both external and internal stakeholders around kind of the progress and operations of your program. So any questions here? Can I maybe get a hand? Like, is this something that anyone is maybe doing or had already been thinking of in their program? And maybe they have an example to share about what the stages of their funnel might be? Or is it too early? Let me check the chat to see if there's anything, anyone saying anything in the chat.
Hi,
Sure. Yeah, great. Thank you.
I'm Anjana from Guardians of Dreams,
Hello.
and we're working with a very small number. of users in our chat program. And this is very interesting to see it, draw like the target bottlenecks, how much recruited and this kind of dashboard. But we've not really measured it this way. But when we were close to the end of a pilot with Glyphic, we kind of wanted to run our numbers and see the engagement. So we saw that, like you mentioned, 100% recruited, and then the folks registered, not all folks were registered. Some of them dropped out, not dropped out, they chose not to. And then engagement, initially it started with all the users engaging, but the frequency reduced. But I think here we're not really talking, I don't know if engagement also means frequency of how much, like the frequency of the user. Do you mean engagement in that context?
Yeah, so these are meant to just be like helpful conceptual steps, but engagement is usually like your first effort in trying to engage a user because like I mentioned earlier, like sometimes the first impression really predicts whether or not they like continue to do things with you later. So when you're talking about like repeated engagements, that's more in the retentions phase. So it's kind of like, they engaged with us like 8 more times or, more than 6 times, which is our version of success, for example. So that's where retention would sit.
Okay.
At least
All
in
right.
this conceptual framework.
Yeah.
So you're thinking exactly along these lines, which is great. It means that these statuses or these categories are not crazy.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that. Anyone else want to chat about their kind of journey in this at all? Cool. Thanks again for sharing. I have a spreadsheet for you all if you want to. Oh, sorry. Did someone else have a question?
Yeah, Robert, I just wanted to share that on the glyphic flow itself, we
Mhm.
can directly see who is like how many people joined, how many people went through that node, went to this node.
Mhm.
But it's not on sheet yet, and we haven't rolled it out to our users yet. But we
Got
do
it.
plan to track that with each node where all everyone is going.
Perfect. You'll have funnels out of the box, I guess, very soon is what I hear, promised, and I'm looking forward to that. Cool. So I have a worksheet for you all that I hope is useful for uh, kind of thinking about your own funnel. But maybe before we dive into that, because that can go on for a very long time. By the way, how am I doing on time? Am I still okay, KP? Yeah, okay. Um, I just want to really quickly talk about how we can use the funnel besides this like targeting bottlenecks question. And I basically there are lots of like cool data sciencey, data analytics things you can do. And I don't expect this to happen like today, but I just wanted to kind of like introduce them for future engagement and excitement. Um, in a sense, like you can categorize data use into 3 areas. Descriptive analysis, which is what we talked about earlier. This is just like looking at your data as is. So, maybe there are big drops in your funnel. Maybe there are certain types of users who are dropping out at each stage that you want to figure out. Um, and the idea is like if there's a big drop somewhere, or if there are certain users who feel like they seem to be dropping out more often than others, you might want to like focus your attention on them and figure out, like come up with a hypothesis for why they're dropping out and how you might address it. Another thing is called predictive analysis, and this is also often called like machine learning, sometimes like called AI, but this is where you use data that you have to predict some future outcomes. So let's say when a user fills out your registration form with some information, maybe that information is very predictive of whether or not they will engage in the future, for example, or whether or not they'll retain in the future. And you can use these predictions to be like, oh, so this person has a 5% chance of uh, retaining in the future, and this person has a 95% chance. Let me focus some special intervention on the 5% person, right? So that's kind of the predictive use case. And the last one, and I think is kind of the most important because it kind of gives you a very actionable thing to do, is experimental analysis. So this is where, like, let's say for all of your users who are done being recruited or done registered, maybe you want to test two different versions of your first engagement activity. So you take half of them, give them the old activity, your current activity, take the other half and give them your new activity and see how it affects engagement, right? So like you can run a very simple test to know like, oh, like I came up with this idea to improve engagement. Let me roll it out to half. Half gets one, the new thing, half gets the old thing, and see if we improve these conversion rates in the next step. So this is like actual science, and this is like very rigorous and like a good way to do that. And just to visualize some of this again, like the descriptive thing is just like looking at where things have issues and targeting that area. Two is like this predictive idea where you can like take all the data you collected at the recruitment stage and the registration stage, for example, and use it to predict future engagement. And that is a way so that you can like know ahead of time who is likely to not engage and who is likely to engage. So that's another use case. Last is experimental stuff. So like you come up with an idea to like help someone who's like likely not to engage, but you want to know how effective that idea is. So let's say you change, like I mentioned earlier, you change the way that you do engagement. So half the people get the old thing, half the people get the new idea. And then you estimate the impact on your future retention, maybe on your future like infant care practices, maybe on your future child health. So basically, you can change the way you engage, and you can then measure its impact on how it improved retention, how it improved infant care practices, how it improved child health. So it's in a sense like you can measure the impact all the way down your funnel by doing that. So I think in the interest of time, maybe it's good to just go straight into the glyphic piece, and maybe I'll go into the worksheet later. I don't know. KP, do you have a?
Yeah, like maybe we can just pause for a minute, like take more questions on the three
Yeah,
use cases
please.
that you shared, because like, that's quite insightful.
Yeah. Sorry. That's a really good point. We should talk about that. Any
Any
questions on
questions?
the data use cases? Has
Uh,
anyone had anyone like kind of heard about these like experiments before? Or they're often known as A/B tests, or I don't know. The interesting part I feel like on these use cases is whenever you hear about data science, you hear about all these terms, and not everyone really knows what all of these terms actually mean. And like, they can be confusing. And so feel free to kind of like say like, oh, I've heard this term, like how does it map to what I claim are like these three different ways of using data? Anything along those lines? Not for now. Maybe one step at a time for these use cases. Okay, but if any people have any questions later or something comes up, feel free to share. So I'll just share this sheet because maybe it's fresh on your minds. But this is in a sense like an a Google sheet that you can make a copy of to basically do exactly what we did earlier, but for yourself. And when you enter like the numbers that we talked about earlier in each of these different parts, it'll compute these conversion rates for you. And you can also use this for cost analysis because maybe it costs different amounts of money to move people from one stage to another. And you can compute those costs, for example. But I will share this as a resource for you all to potentially engage with. But again, maybe in the interest of time, we will not.
Rob, do you have an example of any organization that you're okay to share? Or like if it's not, then it's absolutely fine.
Absolutely. So on
Yeah.
the bottom tabs of this thing I'm about to share, there's one like an example that I filled out that has to do with a community health program that called Living Goods, who I used to work
Sorry,
for.
Rob, just once. Can you just like increase the size of the sheet a bit?
Oh yeah, sure.
Right now, the 100% one.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's very helpful.
okay, great. So this is an example from Living Goods, which is a community health worker organization that I worked for in Kenya and Uganda. And it basically goes through an example of like what each of these states are. So, you know, the recruitment and the registration or onboarding, what each of these states are in the program, what are the activities that we need to do, what are the activities that the user needs to do, and what's kind of the target metric, like the specific thing that you're going to measure in each of these different stages of the funnel. So it's meant to just like help you work through this. And you'll also see a bunch of worksheets from other organizations who've attempted to do this in various levels of completion um, as well. So I will share this with you all. And, you know, because this is like more of an interactive activity, maybe we'll save this to the end when people have questions and they want to kind of work through a little bit, but I want to make sure that we get through all the content, if that's okay with folks. So let me just throw the link in here. Cool. So if you're interested, just like make a duplicate sheet in here, and you can kind of like peek at other people's funnel and see how it's going. And anyway, happy to have you all partake in this. So maybe the next question is like, oh, how will this happen in Gothic? And maybe it'll be all automated very soon. But I'd love to hear kind of the glyphic side of the story.
Yeah. Rob, I have a question on the presentation.
Sure.
Like the data that we see, like the user funnel, say if I have created a dashboard because I want to regularly see like where the major drop-offs are happening, what are the actionable insights that I can take out of it. Is there a particular suggestive frequency in which I should ask questions? Like I should check the data because this might change every week and I might not have a track. And like every week, me checking the retaining of users might be a very overwhelming thing. So do you have any suggested frequency to check or anything from after creation of this point of view?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on how fast your program moves, right? Like if you know, hundreds and thousands of users are coming in on a weekly basis or daily basis, you really do want to check this every day because like big drops, like all of a sudden, like what's really valuable about this actually, even more than anything, is it's debugging for your system. Like imagine one day someone made a change to the Glyphic Flow Designer and you're looking at this on a daily basis, all of a sudden, like registration conversion rate has gone down to 0 or something or fallen very much. And like even at a basic like error checking level, it's very valuable to be able to do that. And you know, above and beyond that, at least in tech companies, you know, where data comes in on an hourly, weekly, you know, daily basis, looking at this at least weekly is a very common thing to do because like let's say you have your weekly metrics check and you look at these numbers just for the past week, right? Not for the entire period, but just for the past week to just look at the trends of, you know, what is the conversion rate trend for registration, for engagement. And if it starts moving in positive directions, great. You know, if it starts moving in the ways that are concerning, then you're like, okay, there's something going on here. We need to do something, guys, and not just like let it sit, right? So that there's this culture around like looking at this, like having people bought in, accountable, and looking at this on a regular basis to know that it's important. And it's often also the case that there are different teams that are responsible for each different stage, if that makes sense. So while
Right.
it's good to see this at a high level, you know, what you do at each of these stages is very nuanced because there's someone designing the recruitment process and there's someone designing the engagement process. And this is a way to kind of like break up the work so it's not like overwhelming, you know, all at once.
Right. Yeah. You answer my other question too. Like, should I just look at the week data because or like the trend? Because that's very tempting always to see, hey, we'll see, but then we'll lose out the sight of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I mean the looking at the whole data is often useful to pass off to your donors, for example. at least us as a donor, if you wouldn't need to write your annual report if you just showed us this. Like we wouldn't need it. Like this would be enough. And this is all we would want to know.
Nice. So yes, guys, you have some tips to like give good insights to your funders as well in future. Cool. I'll just quickly show you like what on Glyphic that you can do to get like one. I'll just share my screen. Is my screen up?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. So these are the three very, very important things that you have to ensure you're following in your flows. So one, have like while you're designing the flow itself, always think of what is the data point that I want to track going ahead. For example, if you are doing if you are having like a funnel like this, you know what recruitment means to you. You should be able to think of it while you're creating the flow. Like, hey, when people are clicking on this particular thing or sending this particular keyword, it means that's a recruitment for me. So always have that in mind and like ensure that you are tracking data at these points. So these are the three very basic things that you have to ensure that you are tracking. One, labels. So labels will help you to place that, like it's more like a bookmark that you are making, where you are then going back and checking like, hey, what update that happened on this label, so that you are able to track these numbers. Two, contact variables. Certain kind of contact variables will help you to again understand about the users, what is the updated data and what is the stored data from a user point of view. That's one thing. Three, result variables. This is one thing which we often see in different organizations flows, where you go by with the default result name that comes, say result underscore 2, result underscore 3, whatever. And like there will be like 4-5 nodes in a flow which will have the same result name. But like when you have the same result name, tomorrow when you are like referring back, you don't know which result, like which questions answers came in what result name. So you have to ensure you are giving like a logical name for your labels, contact variables and result variables, so that you are able to track it in a very detailed manner. As most of you have done pilots right now, you have certain learnings more from a user behavior point of view, or you from your pilot, or from a very qualitative feedback point of view. But as you start moving to your next phases, or as you start scaling, these are like very, very important, as you won't be able to talk to each of your end users, but the quantitative data that you will get will speak a lot about the user behavior, or what are the things that will help you to understand how your chatbot is going. And one is this very basic. Second, very important feature that we want to talk about, like some of you might be aware of it, is about a feature called split by random chance. I'll also show you in a flow. So this will help you to do A/B testings. So, as Rob also spoke about, a lot of times we go by our assumptions sometimes, or like sometimes the data speaks certain things, and you have certain assumptions like, hey, maybe the flow was long, maybe the messages were complex, maybe image didn't work, or video might have worked, or audio might have worked. Before you spend the time while doing while creating those things, or making those changes, it's very, very important to test your assumptions, experiment on what's working and what's not working. So this feature will be very helpful for you. It's called split by random chance. What this node do is, anybody who is entering the node, you can split them into like a different flows. For example, here, like if I would just want to do like a very simple A/B testing, where I want to ask users to send send like a image of their worksheet, just as a sample, random example. I want my users who are parents to send a worksheet ka picture. And I have one, I tried asking them through a message which didn't work. So now I want to ask them through a video, but I don't know if video will also work. So I want to experiment, like, will video, like me explaining through video on how to send worksheet will work, or me explaining through a photo as a flowchart will work, or three, a audio note will work. So like before you actually experiment with your large number of people, maybe with your smaller group, you can experiment this. Like you can say like how many buckets you want to, how many different kind of user experiences that you want to create. Here, for example, I just want to create like one is my video, the other is audio, the other one is image. So here I'll have three different ways of media in this example. So if 10 people are coming to this particular node, the chances of them going in each of the bucket is 33.3%. So it's not like the A will go here, B will go here, C will go here, and D will go here. It's not directly happening. This is completely based on a random chance. So if somebody is entering, the chances of them going, so it, like, there's high likely that will be evenly distributed, but it's not necessarily evenly distributed. So by adding labels of how many entered, how many completed this one or completed through each of your modes, by placing labels at the respective places, you will be better placed to understand which particular format is working with your group of people. And then when you are doing at scale, you can actually use it again, test your hypothesis, and like then use it at scale. Any questions on this particular feature? Okay. Yes. So we hope you use this feature and in general, like track your data regularly and like take more data-driven decisions and like experiment more rather than just going with hypothesis. So, or like assumptions.
Yeah. Do science.
Yeah, the science. Cool. Before, like, we'll wait for a few more minutes for more questions. And meanwhile, I'll just push a poll for us to understand, like, how you like the session, or like what are the things that we have done well, could have done better, so that we can make changes in our next sessions. And we'll also be sharing the recording and the worksheet with you in case you have questions or if you want to try. And you can also write back to us if you have questions. Like we'll share Rob's ideas. In case you have any questions, you can like even unmute yourself and speak.
Hi, no questions, but just want to thank the Glyphic team and Rob. This was very useful. This is something that we haven't really focused on right now, the metrics part of it, especially because for our pilot, we are focusing more on data collection. So all the people who are using the platform are our team members, and we don't really need to track the engagement and retention part. But eventually, as we think of other use cases, this will be super helpful, and this will be something that we'll keep in mind. The worksheet is also quite comprehensively designed. So we'll definitely look at it. Thank you for this. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gayatri. Anybody else have any other questions? Or any thoughts, anything?
Yeah, Krishna, I had a question. How do we get this data that I can see on the Glyphic, right? Below each and every node, how many users have been to that node, how many users have been to this node. How do I get that data into a sheet? I
Uh,
used the read from sheet tool, but the write to sheet, I'm having little trouble figuring it out.
Krishna, you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks. Yes. So Atman, one, all your data will go to your BigQuery. So one, like if your team has like SQL skills or querying skills, you can get your data. Having said that, like Sheets, right to Google Sheet is something that you can use. Like you can like probably raise a Discord query on where you're stuck or join one of our support calls or like even reach out to Priyesh. He'll help you out. And but like one thing for you to remember is Google Sheet might not be scalable. So always do not just like it's like a quick solution, but all your data, like as you scale, will go to BigQuery, and it's always better to pull it from BigQuery rather than from Google Sheets.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Krishna.
Priyesh can help you out, or like even on Discord, we'll.
Sure. Thank you.
Gautam, you had a question?
Yeah, no, more than a question, just a addition. I would recommend that you use the numbers next to nodes only to identify if someone has hit that node. It's a counter, right? You can hit the same node multiple times. Like Krishna said, writing to a sheet will be a way better way of doing this, or writing some simple SQL to see if people have passed through which node, right? If you have V5, there's a simpler way of using it called what results by flow. So you can use that. If you need any help, reach out. That'll do what you want faster.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Cool. If you don't have any questions, like maybe after filling the feedback form, you can drop off. Thank you so much, Rob. It was super helpful. And that gives, I hope like most of them start implementing and ask more questions to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, feel free to reach out. Yeah, it's good to meet you all.